like to call to order the special Village Board Workshop meeting to discuss stormwater utility presentation on July 7, 2014 at 7 o'clock p.m. Clerk Simsky, may I have a roll call, please?
Mayor Gunter.
Here.
The clerk's here. Trustee Addington.
Here.
Trustee Barker.
Here.
Trustee Berry's absent. Trustee Nero's absent. Trustee Scott.
Here.
Trustee Seneca. Here. Manager Searle.
Here.
Attorney Zimonak.
Here.
Assistant Manager May.
Here.
And we have several other people that will
Yes.
be presenting.
Yes, and at this time, would everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'd like to welcome everybody to this workshop. And on the agenda, we did note today we will have an executive session after the on the agenda after public comments, and after the executive session there will not be any business, so we'll adjourn after that point. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Director of Municipal Service Steve May, but I personally want to thank all those who participated in the beginning with the concerned residents, to the Stormwater Committee, to the stakeholders group, and then to our consultant for gathering all the information and presenting it to us this evening. I know there's a lot of work, and we're kind of looking forward to hearing the results. And I think at this time I'll let Steve take it over and maybe introduce some other people.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor. Tonight you'll see a presentation on the stormwater utility study. This is a culmination. It's hard to describe how far back to go. I mean, stormwater management issues are, have to be as old as the town are, and to different degrees in different eras. And for us, only to touch on this briefly, but if you start at 1986 or 1985 with Village Engineer Bill Lytham, we were instituted a pretty strong stormwater management ordinance, which at the time was considered one of the most restrictive in the area, and this was all pre-DuPage County ordinance as well. And that came into play, and that governed all communities, and we've always been, well, you have to be as strict as the county ordinance, but we've always been a little bit stricter. And this is just to speak that this isn't a new concern for us. And we had a pretty, in the 80s certainly, but more recently in 2007, 2008, we had a very significant event that plagued our town and created a lot of issues, and it inspired a village-wide stormwater management study. And from that study, we did a more focused study in one of our neighborhoods. And all along, we've been identifying the issues and know we need to address many of these and are looking to do it. And can only sum it up as it's been difficult to, it is a issue that competes for funding with all other municipal services, and we've pick away at the issues, but there are many of them, and they're getting bigger. Most recently, and particularly for this board, was the events of a year ago, April. We had not just in Westmont, it was obviously a storm event, set of events that devastated most of Northeast Illinois. And at that time, the board was newly sworn in, and one of their earliest meetings, there was a large group here expressing their concern over stormwater management, and the mayor formed and appointed what we called then an ad hoc committee on stormwater management. And it was very, certainly staff participated, but it was very strongly composed of citizenry in town, and they did a lot of phenomenal work. I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing all their efforts, but of many of the good suggestions that they came up, one of them was because of the I'll just call it competition for funding, they proposed that we investigate the stormwater utility as a mechanism for generating funding that could be dedicated to stormwater management and wouldn't be in competition with any other service. So at that time, the village board, with staff, retained consultant AMEC, who's here tonight, and we are going through the stormwater feasibility study. And with their work and with a lot of participation and going back to the original ad hoc committee on stormwater management, Kim Nickel, our planning engineer, and our stormwater administrator, and Mr. McIntyre were very involved in administering those meetings. And when we got to the stormwater feasibility, there was a very large public participation, what we call the stakeholders group, or what you were mentioning with the stakeholders. So through many hours of, we had, I think it was 4 different meetings, right? And 2 hours each, and they all learned the subject matter and debated it and came up with recommendations. And that, combined with the expertise of the consultants, led us to this presentation tonight. You all are going to get the same crash course that they all learned in 8 hours of meeting, and you will get the summary of all their efforts tonight. And look for your input and recommendation on how we move forward with proposing a stormwater utility, which later we'll describe involves the referendum this fall and how this can be administered. So Larry, I don't know if, has that covered it? So with that, the AMEC is the engineers that were selected to look into this. So there were many statements of qualifications that were solicited, and we chose them for their expertise in this subject matter. With us tonight is Doug Knoll and Jay Kisson in the back too, with their experience in this, as well as what they've put together as what we're considering our draft proposal for your consideration. So if you're no immediate questions, I'm going to let Mr. Knoll come up and describe our efforts to date.
Good evening. I want to echo the thanks that we got from the citizens on this project before I ever get started telling you about the project itself, because they were very great help to us and provided a lot of useful input, particularly on the rate structure, which we'll be discussing here in a little bit. I wanted to start out with something pretty basic, which is a overview of what a stormwater utility is and why stormwater utilities are popular, just so that everybody's at the same level. Basically, as you know, local government roles have expanded a lot over the last 20, 30 years. So have stormwater programs. So have the number of hands that are reaching out looking for funding for pet projects and necessary projects. There's a lot of other priorities competing for general fund dollars. For a lot of cities and villages and counties around the country, a switch to user fee-based funding has been occurring over the last 30 or 35 years, primarily because with enterprise funds you can have a dedicated revenue source. One of the things you run into quite often with stormwater funding is that on a year-to-year basis, it's up and down. If it's on general fund-based funding, there's a lot of important things that are happening, a lot of different priorities year in and year out. And if you're trying to set up a program based on general fund funding where you have to pay for things year in and year out, basically you're looking at what you generate for the lowest amounts of revenue over the long term, because you can't guarantee yourself that on a year-to-year basis you'll get the higher levels of funding. Whereas with user fees, you target a level of program, and the program actually drives the funding, the rate that you need to charge for services. Popularity of user fee funding for stormwater or stormwater utility funding is that the fees are set up equitably. They're based on the demand for service that individual properties put on the system. It's a reliable level of funding, so it's stable. It's not subject to multiple demands from other departments or other activities. It's program-driven funding, so it's adequate. You define a program and the cost of service, and You set your rate to be able to generate the revenue to cover the cost of service. And it's flexible. You don't have to have only a fee. You can have multiple funding methods, such as specialty fees like plan review and inspection fees can pay for services that only a small part of the community partakes in. Since the first stormwater utility was set up in 1973, there's been almost 1,600 of them set up in the United States, probably less than 20 in the state of Illinois. Most of the utilities in the state of Illinois have occurred over the last 10 to 12 years. Stormwater utilities can be a number of different things. It can be just purely a funding method. It can be a program concept within a department, or it can be a standalone department. In most cases, it's basically just a funding method to fund services that are being provided within an existing organizational framework, but funding them at a higher level. Infrastructure program fees come in a couple of different varieties. Some are consumption-based fees like water, sewer, and electric, where you can measure the actual amount of usage. Others are capacity-based, like cable TV, telephone service, stormwater service, where you have to provide the capacity so that when you have a storm event, you have the infrastructure in place to be able to manage it. Other reasons why capacity-based is important for stormwater is that rainfall is unpredictable, so you can't base it on rainfall amounts. You need a sustainable cash flow, like I mentioned earlier, to be able to have a program that is reliable and can provide the community with the services it is looking for. Metering of runoff is impractical, and for the most part, and as you'll see as we move on, it's really a simple basis for billing. It's easy to understand, easy to explain to ratepayers, and is defensible in the courts. When we started the project, the desired outcomes were to develop a utility concept that would be capable of funding the stormwater management program, to work with citizens and the public to review and fully look at options so that a conceptual plan would be as acceptable as possible to other citizens of Westmont, and to define the program, the rate structure, and an ordinance for board action prior to the referendum. The approach that we use for stormwater utility development is we've been using it for about 25 years with some fine tuning over the years. Basically, it boils down to 4 different program areas. A public outreach and education component, an involvement component, a stormwater program component where you define what it is you are doing, what you need to be doing, and how you get from point A to point B. A finance section that basically is the development of a revenue plan for the generation of the revenue that you need in order to implement your stormwater program, and a database section to look at the data that you have to build your master account file and to distribute the cost of service over the ratepayers in the community. Our specific approach, I wanted to start out with, we had the citizen stakeholder group. As Steve mentioned, they met 4 times in an 8-week period. There was a very high level of participation and discussion in the meetings. A lot of recommendations, and I'll point some of those out as we go through the presentation this evening. The group was made up of 11 residents, 2 folks from the Chamber of Commerce, the village library, church, school districts, developer, the park district, and village staff. For the program development, what we did basically was to work with this stakeholder group to identify what they felt were the program priorities for stormwater management in the village of Westmont. We talked with staff, looked at the ad hoc committee report and their recommendations, and then identified what the current program looks like, what we needed to do in order to get from the current program to all those recommendations that have been made by the different groups, and what program enhancements are necessary in order to be able to get there. Then we looked at program costs for over a 5-year period for the program that was going to be developed. Data analysis, basically we're looking at GIS data and talking with the utility billing staff of the village to make sure first that a stormwater line item could be added to the village utility bills, and also to look at the data that DuPage County has in its GIS to identify the impervious areas on the parcels within the village. With that information, we were able to estimate the size of the rate base based on statistics of what each individual and collectively what all the residential properties look like in terms of impervious area. Then we also developed some examples of how the potential stormwater utility would impact different properties around the village. So we used GIS data in order to be able to extract the characteristics of those properties. Revenue plan, and you see the word rate in here a lot, and we're going to define each of them, but basically we're looking at what we're going to bill for as a physical indicator of demand on the properties, which is impervious area, how we're going to bill for impervious area, what the structure will look like. Is it going to be a single charge for everybody, or will we have tiers within single family for the single family properties? And we did rate modeling to actually come up with the rate based on all these different inputs. And then we talked with the stakeholders about a credit and incentive program, and got general information back from them on the credit and incentive program and policy. And we provided in our approach, we usually provide a outline of a outreach plan, looking at things such as citizen stakeholder groups, key ratepayer meetings after a rate has been adopted by the board, media releases, public meetings, frequently asked questions, a variety of different ways to get information out about what it is that we're attempting to do and how it will impact the community, both beneficially and cost-wise. Then we put together a draft ordinance and shared it with the village attorney. What our thoughts were for a ordinance that would, the outline of an ordinance that would implement both the Stormwater Enterprise Fund and the actual rate. So I mentioned before, when we started looking at the program, we looked at a lot of different information and inputs, and part of it was the recommendations of the ad hoc committee. And of course, 3 of their recommendations were directly applicable, one being looking at a utility as a concept to begin with. But 2 had to do with operations and maintenance of the stormwater management infrastructure. And one of those recommendations was to consider and adopt an annual stormwater infrastructure inspection policy, which implies that there's going to be some additional staff time involved. And then also to consider and adopt a policy to employ personnel dedicated to the stormwater program and maintenance needs. Again, more personnel to maintain specifically stormwater infrastructure. Maintaining the infrastructure is very important because unless you maintain the capacity of the infrastructure through a regular maintenance program, it can't possibly perform to its design specification. And the citizen group made a number of recommendations, and during our first meeting, we talked about what stormwater meant to the members of the group and got their feedback on what they perceived to be issues related to stormwater management in Westmont. And you can see that they had a lot of issues or characteristics of flooding that were important to them. And even though there's about 8 bullets, it actually boils down to about 3 things: disruption of service, loss of property value, and quality of life. And they also had other recommendations where they felt like that the village needed to have a comprehensive approach to stormwater management, integrating operations, engineering, and capital, that there was more public education needed, and that water quality impacts should be considered with whatever solutions are looked at in terms of capital projects. So the program that we've identified in the report that you'll be seeing has 4 sections: administration, engineering, operations, and capital. On the administration front, the budgeting and finance and legal services are provided. They'll change somewhat because budgeting and finance will have to be more involved in the process of funding the projects and in the annual financial planning for the stormwater utility. A big impact or larger impact will be the billing program, which doesn't exist for stormwater now, which would have to occur. Because you're going to have, even if you use the existing utility billing system, you're going to have new stormwater-only clients or customers, properties that have no utility services now, such as a parking lot, that generate stormwater runoff that will receive a stormwater bill. So there's going to be additional services that have to be provided in terms of billing. There'll be cash management once the payments come in. So there'll be a cost involved in managing a stormwater utility. Engineering will be continuing to provide technical guidance. There should be funding for studies and design of projects, construction of projects. A proposed full-time stormwater staff member to manage the projects and the contractors involved in the projects, manage a credit and incentive program, and to provide coordination with the DuPage County program. The operations and maintenance, as I mentioned earlier, when we looked at the existing program, it was mainly reactive. So we proposed a blanket 30% increase in the activities that are already occurring to try to get them to be a little more proactive. Then we added the 2 full-time maintenance staff in order to make that even a little more intense, because when you start building new infrastructure, you don't want to have maintenance of the new infrastructure lag behind and have possible failures because of lack of capacity. And the big item was the capital program. We had an initial 5-year plan. We had a list of projects that came from the Stormwater Master Plan that was performed a couple of years ago, and prioritization recommendations from the ad hoc committee. So what we looked at was a combination of debt-financed capital improvements and pay-as-you-go capital improvements. On the pay-as-you-go, we were looking at basically $100,000 a year, but $240,000 in the first year for several small projects. Then bonding for the debt-financed, we looked at a $10 million bond that would start midway in year 1. The annual debt service would be about $740,000 on the $10 million. And the debt service would run 20 years. And all these things were pulled together in a way to try to keep the initial rate at less than $10 a month for single-family residents, typical single-family residents. And after the 5 years, there'll be additional capital, because there were some known problem areas that were not addressed in the existing master plans. There was no definite pricing on or cost estimates for the projects that would have to be built. As a ballpark estimate, we're assuming that might be somewhere in the range of $16 million. Based on the discussions we had with the village's financial consultant, at today's rates, it would cost about $2 million for every $2 million worth of bond debt. It would cost about an extra $1 a month in the stormwater fee. But that's down the road right now. You've seen this list before with the ad hoc committee's report. Basically, what we ended up with is about $12.2 million in projects. About 11.8 of it is out of that report. The last 2 items are the continuation of the master planning to address the projects that were not studied in detail the last time, and also to provide a detailed drainage inventory with condition of pipes, GPS grade mapping, and all the information being GIS compatible. so that it'd be easier for staff to manage the information that comes from the maintenance program and from the capital program. And the information can be used for additional things in the future, such as part of the additional master planning. This is the list of projects that were not studied in detail. And it's not an all-inclusive list. We're sure there's other locations where there's going to be problems that pop up. Just to show the relative levels of funding that we're talking about, the credit program, if adopted, would cost about $64,000 a year. The capital projects would be about $840,000 a year. Operations and maintenance would be about $500,000 a year. Engineering about $150,000, and admin would be about $20,000. So it's about a $1.6 million program. So once we got the cost or the revenue requirement, we started looking at the other elements of the rate structure. And those elements, as I mentioned before, the rate basis, the rate method, the rate structure itself, the rate base, and modeling. Rate basis is pretty straightforward for most utilities around the United States. And as I mentioned earlier, this basis has been defended in court. Basically, every engineering hydrology text in the country associates increased runoff with increased development on properties. The more impervious surface you've got, the more runoff you're going to generate. So we discussed this rate basis and a couple of others with the stakeholder group. This rate basis that's fairly simple. Everybody understands that if you pave a surface, the water can't soak through it into the ground anymore. That it'd be very easy to explain to others, very simple and straightforward. This was the rate basis that was selected, was impervious area. Rate method that was selected is the equivalent residential unit method, or ERU method. And basically what that is it's a method where if you don't have data in most cases for every single family residential property in the community, you usually take a sample of those properties, like 100 properties or 120 or 30, and you digitize the impervious surfaces on those and use the resulting median or mean amount of impervious area on the properties as being representative of that whole set of properties, which is like 80% of the properties here in Westmont, single-family residential. So what we did was we talked with the group about different ways to use imperviousness as a rate base. And this rate method was the selected method. The median value of imperviousness on a single-family residential property in Westmont is 2,950 square feet. This isn't based on a sample. This is based on going into the DuPage County GIS and looking at all 5,400 properties and coming up with the median value. And the mean value is actually on the next slide. And it's not much different, but we felt like the median was more representative. One of the decisions that we'll talk about also on the next slide that was recommendations anyway that was made by the stakeholder group was to look at a 3-tiered rate structure. That one single-family rate probably isn't going to convince everybody that it's fair. You need to have a small, medium, and large or high rate. So we've got 3 different rates in the single-family residential tier. The thing about this type of rate structure is that we've got 40% of the total imperviousness in Westmont comes from single-family residential properties. So the way this is set up with the tiers, or if you didn't have the tiers, is that at the end of the day, 40% of the revenue in this rate model would be generated by single-family residential properties, and the 60% would be generated by the non-single-family properties. Same ratios as where the impervious areas are at, so that it was as equitable as possible. So other properties will be billed based on the multiples of 2,950 square feet. The nice thing about the ERU method is in its name. It's an equivalency method. So billing for ERUs means basically that you're billing based on every property based on increments of 2,950 square feet. So it's just like billing for kilowatt hours of electricity or thousands of gallons of water. In this case, we're billing for 2,950. In the initial rate, kind of letting the cat out of the bag here, but the initial rates per ERU is about $9.60 for this $1.6 million program. I mentioned that we looked at the imperviousness of all the single-family properties. This graph is actually 5,400 columns side by side, sorted from the smallest to largest, so it gives you the perfect detail of the distribution of impervious area by a single-family residential property within the community. We didn't include the non-single family because the largest non-single family's got 530,000 square feet on it of impervious area. So the scale, basically the single-family part of it would be flat if we tried to show them all together. When we started looking at ways to implement tiers, we looked at a couple of different things. The first thing that jumped out at us was that with this graph, there's two natural breakpoints in the graph. One at about 1,900 square feet of impervious area and one at about 4,000, where the curves start to either race up or drop off. And happens to also be plus or minus one standard deviation from the median of the distribution. So we thought that everything seemed to look pretty good for being able to use those 2 points. Plus, they followed at about the 15% and 85% points on the distribution. So there's 15% in the low end, 15% in the high end, and that long flat area there on the curve is about 70% of the properties. So using those as breakpoints for the tiers, you have 15% of the group in Tier 1, which is less than 1,900 square feet. And since 1,900 is about 30% less than the mean, we decided to reduce the rates by 30% for those 15% and increase the rate by 15%, or by 30%, excuse me, for the top tier, the top 15%. And so it all still generates the same amount of revenue as if all 5,400 properties were being billed at the same rate. Next item that I wanted to discuss are rate modifiers. When you set up a rate structure, and the tiering and those types of things are part of it for single-family rates. Another part is making sure that you've got equity builders in the rate structure. And the most common equity builder that you find in a stormwater utility is a credit program, where you give credit for property owners providing stormwater management services that actually reduce your cost of doing business for them. So with the credit program, you can give credit for reducing operational costs, such as maintenance costs, for operating detention facilities, for complying with permits, or for helping to reduce the capital cost by over-designing detention on your own property so that areas that don't have detention can benefit from the fact that you're withholding more water on your property than you're required to by these villages' stormwater standards. How they work, basically they're a direct reduction in service charges. If my service charge is $10 a month and I've got a 25% credit, I would be billed $7.50 a month. And that would last for as long as our credit policy allows me to continue getting the credit without proof, as long as I prove on an annual basis that I'm maintaining the stormwater control and providing an annual update on the fact that I've paid ABC lawn mowing to mow a detention area or whatever maintenance is required. One of the things about credit programs is that credits aren't just given to people for qualifying. You have to apply for them in almost every instance. The reason is because there's going to be criteria that the village sets that have to be met in order to get the credits. And every credit program has a maintenance requirement. And by requiring an application for credit, the applicant typically has to indemnify the community against people getting hurt while they're anywhere near the stormwater control, or if the thing fails and causes downstream damage. And they have to provide right of entry in order for village staff to inspect. And they're basically ongoing. Some utility programs have got sunsets built into them where you have to reapply every 5 years. All stormwater utilities have forced sunsets when you fail to comply with the requirements for getting the credit, like not reporting or not doing the maintenance. Some communities charge a fee for applying, others don't. I know that next door in Downers Grove, I believe their fee is $300 for applying for a credit. Champaign and Urbana recently implemented stormwater utilities, and neither of them are charging for credit applications, but they've made their applications very rigorous to complete, so that your engineers for the developers are basically hand feeding them with the information that they need in order to be able to approve the credit application. So they're a lot more detailed than the applications in Downers Grove. Types of activities that often get credits: permeable pavement, cisterns, green roofs, rain gardens and bioswales, detention ponds, infiltration practices. We're working on a credit policy with village staff now. It's still a work in progress. These are the limits for that proposed credit and incentive program, very similar to the one next door in Downers Grove. Rain barrels are a $25 discount per barrel, maximum of 2 per property. Rain gardens would be about a $250 incentive. And incentives differ from credits in that it's a one-time payout. It's like a grant program. So it's, usually the requirements for achieving success in applying for the incentives are a lot less strenuous than for credits because it is a one-time payout. The permeable pavements and other types of best management practices are set at $300. Then the ongoing credits, we've got it set up at 20% apiece for volume reduction and rate reduction. Rate reduction being slowing down the amount of runoff coming off of a property, volume being reducing the volume of runoff coming off of a property during a design storm event. Then for properties that have had detention that are not compliant with the current regulations, we're proposing a existing detention credit, which would allow them to get some credit for subdivision detention facilities that have to be maintained at the homeowners association expense. But they wouldn't be able to add, like with the rate reduction and volume reduction and water quality, as long as you're exceeding standards, you can qualify for each of the three and get up to a 50% credit. With the existing detention credit, since you're not exceeding the local standard, you would only qualify for the existing detention credit. And to reduce the amount of effort that it puts on staff, we're looking at the existing detention credit as being one that would have to be applied for by the homeowners association on behalf of the owners in the neighborhood, so that you get one application instead of 40 or 50 or 60. Direct discharge credits are credits that are available to properties that discharge into receiving waters, the creeks or river, without ever going through a village-owned infrastructure, whether it be a culvert or a sewer pipe or any other infrastructure. But it can actually leave the community and snake back in a little bit further south, and then you'd still be looking at it as you're going through a downstream infrastructure that has to be maintained. Then the education credit is set as being $3 a student. And this is something that's fairly common amongst communities that have small MS4 permits, similar to the NPDS permit that the village of Westmont has. A lot of studies have shown that education in the schools is well worth the cost, and that by training third graders or fifth graders or even multiple grades for 4 or 5 hours during the course of a school year as part of a earth sciences type curriculum, that you can really get in early on good stormwater management and water quality management practices in the home. Some examples of how the proposed fee would impact the ratepayers around the community are shown here. Basically, the impervious area amount triggers which tier they fall into. If you look at the last tier, the 5100 East 59th Street, that property's got about 5,100 square feet of impervious area on it. So it would be in tier 3, so the monthly rate would be $12.48. The annual fee would be about $149. The tier 2, which is where 70% of the properties fall, the annual fee for the tier 2 is about $115. And we also looked at a lot of examples of non-residential properties. This shows, I think it's about 12 non-residential properties, a couple of schools, a couple of businesses. Shows the total impervious area, the number of ERUs that would be on that property, and the monthly fee. So for some of these properties that have stormwater management controls on site already, they might qualify easily for 20% or 30% or up to 50% off of their bills by applying for the stormwater utility credit program. This is just an image of Westview Middle School. It sits on about 6 parcels showing all the impervious areas. The numbers actually were in the table. So in the report, we make about 10 recommendations. First recommendation is to adopt a level of service that we propose for the stormwater management program with the advice from the committee. Second is to create an enterprise fund for stormwater management, and then to adopt a stormwater utility fee where the revenue would be specifically dedicated to that fund, so that it couldn't be used for other purposes other than stormwater management. That the rate be based on impervious area, because it's the most universally accepted estimate or surrogate for measuring the demand that each property puts on the system and on the program. That the billing unit be the 2,950 foot or square foot ERU. We adopt the tiers that were proposed for single-family residential and duplex properties. That for all other properties, it would be $9.60 per 2,950 square feet of impervious area. That all properties would be charged the fee, with the exception of the public right-of-way. The public right-of-way includes the city streets, which are part and parcel to the drainage system. Streets are designed to help convey and help store stormwater runoff, so we typically exclude them. We like to have a minimum charge in here, otherwise you drive yourself nuts with trying to bill 1/10 of an ERU. So we're recommending that a half ERU be the minimum charge for any property. We are recommending that there be a credit and incentive program. As I said, the one that we just showed you is a work in progress and will definitely be modified somehow before it's final, but we wanted to get something to put out there as a straw man. And the last recommendation is actually from the ad hoc committee, which is to continue to coordinate with the DuPage County Stormwater Management, because there might be ways to leverage having a revenue source for cost sharing on projects and other funding opportunities. Just to let you see what other single-family rates look like around the state. They range from the low $3 to up to Winnetka's $21.83 that they just officially started billing the first of this month. I believe Downers Grove is on a annual increase path, so the $8.94 will probably go up next year. I know Morton is. Morton's on a 5-year, 8% per year increase. The report, which we're calling it as final draft for now until we get your comments, is available as a PDF. The bullet list shows what the contents basically are for the report. The draft ordinance that we gave to Mr. Zimnick had one thing in it that was asked for by the stakeholder group, which was that there be some type of check and balance for large rate increases. They would like to see a stormwater utility ordinance, if there is a stormwater utility, include some type of limit to where if you exceed a certain percent increase per year in the, any 1 year in the rate, that it would require going to the voters. So as a starting point, we put 5% in there. There's a number of materials that would be available for the period of time during which people will be educating themselves on this issue for the referendum. This slide gives a quick list of specific materials. The report that we were just talking about, this presentation, a fact sheet on stormwater utilities, a fact sheet or FAQ on the proposed Westmont stormwater utility, example applications of the fees, such as that chart we had a few minutes ago, or more of the images with statistics. The draft ordinance would be available, and the table of rates from across the state of Illinois, which could be expanded to be regional, not just the state of Illinois, if the board would prefer. And if a referendum is approved, the things that would still need to be done would be the actual look at the billing system with the billing system vendor to be able to be ready to bill stormwater, to develop the actual master account file that would be imported into the existing billing system. The DuPage County database is really good, but it's probably only about 95% accurate because it's not been, the impervious area layer has not been kept up over the last 7 years since it was developed. So there's probably some maintenance work that would need to be done on the impervious layer. Continued public outreach, the finalization of this credit incentive program, and the development of a manual that's kind of a go-by for local developers and property owners to be able to see how they have to, what they have to do in order to be able to apply. Customer service support, and then action from y'all to say start billing.
I think what we'll do is, there's a lot of information. Appreciate you going through it. At this point, I'd allow our attorney, John Zemanek, to explain the process as far as the referendum from the village's standpoint.
Sure, thanks, Mayor, and I'll be brief. The village has, although I think I informed the village originally it was until August 4th, by which time a referendum question has to be submitted to the county election officials. It's actually August 18th, so an ordinance has to be passed on or before August 18th, submitted to the county to get a referendum question on the ballot for the November 4th general election. And that referendum question would essentially state, should the village of Westmont adopt a stormwater management utility ordinance, or words to that effect. And the public gets to vote, the residents of the village, yes or no. And if it's approved by 51% or more of the registered voters, then it will get approved. The village has to pass the stormwater ordinance before the general election. But it doesn't take effect until after the general election, depending on what happens with the referendum question. So it's subject to the referendum passing. The village has been, through their consultant, has drafted a stormwater utility ordinance. It's currently getting reviewed. It's the hope to pass that sooner rather than later, so it can get distributed to the public, so there's no secret to what is going to be in this ordinance and what the rates are going to be. And so you have as much time as possible leading up to the general election as to what the stormwater utility is, what the ordinance contains.
And the ordinance contains a lot of these recommendations as far as rate structure.
It does. The only thing it doesn't contain, but it references, is the manual on credits. And that's something that there's already a draft outline put together. It's going to be available for public review. The consultant reviewed it tonight, but it talks about how you can get stormwater management credits to offset your monthly bills.
At this point, I'd like to open up any questions from the audience. Just come on up to the podium, state your name and address, and if none, then
Mayor, I'll make one other question about the referendum. The village cannot be an advocate for having this stormwater utility pass or not pass. This is an option the village is proposing. The village can provide public factual information about what a stormwater management utility is. Can talk about some of the benefits, can also talk about some of the pitfalls, but it can't be an advocate for it because Illinois law prohibits the village from advocating on a public referendum question. There can be private citizen groups that are in favor of this and that want to advocate. That would be great. There also may be private citizen groups that are opposed to this that want to campaign against it. That's their right as well. I throw that out there.
very good. Joe, would you like? Yeah.
For the official record, my name is Joe Hernsrick. I live at 224 East Naperville Road, which is located at Black Hawk in Naperville in the Northeast Acres Village of Westmont. Just a couple points. I understand I looked at the metrics and don't have the graphics down. I didn't quite get very good notes. I want to get better notes on this and look at the fees. But I looked at the fee, and one of my points on the fee is that the only thing is it's for me, I roughly guess from my looking at my PRC coverage this afternoon, that it's about a $115 increase in my annual outlay. Whereas if it was a property tax of $115, I could write it off my state and federal income tax. That is the one objection I have to the funding process, or first objection I have. The second, I know where people have 45, 50, 55, 60% of their property covered. So with structure and hard surface. I've heard the people in here, making their petitions for their patio, their 10,000 square foot patio or whatever. Whereas perhaps my neighbor has, I've figured out, has about 17% of her property covered. But she will probably, I believe she will probably come into the higher category of coverage because of what she has on her property, but she only has 17% of the property covered because she's got 100 by 299 or 301 foot property. So some of this, and this information, of course, is available, Google. Thank God for Google. We could go and we get Google drones or just look at a Google map and you can see the coverage. what people contribute may not be covered, and I understand the calculation. I'd like to look more into the math and the actual stuff. I actually see this online, his presentation put up online, so I could read the slides and some of the, perhaps if there's documentation behind it. But again, as I say, it's a critical issue, and everybody who worked on this, I think, did a fabulous job, and I want to compliment everybody because it's an issue we have to address. It's only unfortunate that the Tisches can't be helping us pay for this, with their contributions, because I believe they own TNC Builders at the time. That was part of their organization when Oakwood was built, or when there was a condo complex on this townhouse complex, which is massive coverage on the south that was supposed to be open and industrial area. Things like that, that the people who actually caused this problem in the first place, Jack Knaufer and his attitude towards farms in DuPage County, if that had all stayed in there, we would not have much of the problem we have today. So that's all I have to say, but thank you to everybody for doing a good job, and I thought the consultant's report was excellent.
Thank you, Joe.
Mayor, one response on the tax issue.
I was going to ask you to respond.
Yeah, the village as a non-home rule municipality is subject to the tax cap. So there's only so much that the village can tax for all of its funding needs. The village could conceivably implement what it wants to do as a tax, but again, subject to the tax cap, if tax money were allocated towards stormwater management, it would take away money for other village services, essential services.
So we cannot construct a stormwater utility and have that as a separate taxing body?
No. We can allocate a portion of the taxes, basically that we already tax up to the maximum and allocate it for that, but again, it's going to take away from somewhere else.
Yes, that's a point that we need to make across. Thank you. It was an unclear point to me, and as I said, like the city of Chicago, part of that water rate, I remember Mayor Emanuel a few years ago, when he proposed his water rate, the increases to our water rate, laughingly telling how we're going to pay, the suburbs is going to pay for putting in water meters, water mains, and sewers in the city of Chicago. So I'm paying for theirs along with my own. And also, one other quick question. Does anybody know anything what the county is doing?
The county, the county, along with one other county, got some enabling legislation passed last year, which allows them to operate basically a stormwater utility throughout the unincorporated areas of the county. But that's a long way off. They still have to study it. They have to form a committee. They have to figure out how they're going to implement it. They have to figure out how they're going to coordinate with municipalities. Kim, I don't know if you have additional information, but right now, I don't even know if DuPage County is going to go forward with that. They had the legislation that enables them to. If that's going to have any impact on village residents, it's kind of unknown, but I'm going to assume the answer is going to be minimal.
They're looking into it.
Come on up to the, yeah, we'll record you.
Record me. If they do go forward with the stormwater utility, they think it will be like 2 to 3 years. They are looking into input from different communities as to how they want to spend the money now. Compared, they first have a tax right now, and that was instituted in 1992. And they've spent a lot of money on doing projects in the eastern part of DuPage. And right now they're looking into whether they, different, input of how we want to spend this utility. And we have told them that we would like them to spend more of that toward village problems with localized drainage issues like we have. So they're collecting information, but if they did do something, it would be 2 to 3 years out.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, just one more quick
A
question.
rebuttal. Come on up to the microphone.
Okay, sorry. Yes, I got to get the microphone.
Yeah, get the microphone.
Just a quick question about, all right, we take care of the village of Westmont. The village of Westmont, you look at the borders of the village of Westmont, we go in and out. The water problem is not just the village of Westmont's. From my own neighborhood, the Salt Creek watershed, we flow into Oak Brook and into Hinsdale before it hits Salt Creek. So really, we could make all the improvements in the world in our area, and, including the movement of the sheet flow out of the area on a more organized basis. But once it hits the golf course in my neighborhood, that's the end of the line. Actually, once it hits Richmond Street, because that's Clarendon Hills over there. Is there any effort or plan or concept to work together with our neighboring municipalities in the various flow areas, Flag Creek and Salt Creek and St. Joseph Creek watersheds, to get together with these communities and try to put together projects so that what we do as a village not only provides immediate relief to us, but also works with going downstream as a team effort.
Steve or Kim?
Yeah, Mr. Hernsrich, an excellent question, but it certainly isn't a, that's actually 20 questions built into one. It's a, a big enough complex topic. We are, if we have one advantage, is that Westmont is the top of the hill. So all of our watersheds drain out of town, and with one little small exception, there is no inbound surface water coming from another community. And with that, we're talking about stormwater management. We're not talking about eliminating it or sending it screaming downhill. We're talking about managing it and dealing with it in a more intelligent way than having it just flood onto people's properties in an uncontrolled manner. So yes, there's always that coordination. We will always have a responsibility at our boundaries as to controlling how much gets released past this point. Before and after should essentially be the same. And what the county is looking at are big regional projects that are not subject to municipal boundaries. So ones that can help multiple communities or that are interrelated or connected like you described are the opportunities that they're looking for to address with their utility, or at least as they're describing it now, so that their utility is not duplicating efforts, that a Westmont utility would be, or Downers Grove.
Okay,
But it's a great question. It's a big topic.
I know it's a big topic, but these are the kind of things, we're just beginning to get where we should have been 45 years ago. Be really honest. I worked on a CATS and urban planning study in college, and this disaster was foreseen years ago because that they knew that they would build over all of DuPage County. The study already said, here's the plan, and the project manager said, yes, it's a lovely plan. The committee loves the plan, and they'll never pass. They knew that the Carroll streams and all this would be built up in the farm areas of the Cook County, DuPage County, and that we've now built up in that area, and that's part of the problem, is there's no place where the water went to go and to actually go into the ground naturally. We've covered all that over.
Interestingly, the state legislature has said, water is an essential service. You can form a utility and charge residents for water and for electricity and for gas and for transportation and wastewater and many other essential public services, but stormwater always got short shrift and was never recognized by the state legislature as an important enough problem that the village should be able to fund this separately, either through user fees or taxes or whatever. The tax power just recently came, but it's still, again, when you tax, it's never a very popular option, and it's still subject to the tax cap. The user fees is something that now is finally starting to get implemented, but again, through my legal research, I recommend only through a referendum approved by the voters.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. Come on up to the podium. Anybody, again, just state your name and address. And
My name is Diane Cole, and I live at 521 Cumner Road. And I appreciate everything tonight because we are definitely affected by the lack of stormwater. And I would pay 5 times what you're asking here. But my big concern is that now that you've done this, and how are we going to get the referendum to pass if the village has to remain, neutral in this? What is going to be the marketing plan? How, besides online and brochures, what is going to be the task force? In the current economic scenario that everybody is, the first thing that people want to see is, no, I don't want to pay for something. So how do you see that being implemented?
I would imagine you want Friends Against Stormwater, or somebody that you'd have a community stakeholders group that would assist in promoting the passage of the referendum. And again, like John said, we cannot do that with any of our resources. We can do it as private residents, but we cannot do it as a village promoting passage of this. All we can do is provide the information. We would hope that if there's a strong enough interest in the stormwater management in this community, that we would have our own residents help us, or help the community support this.
Okay.
But that is a step that still has to be planned. I mean, we're, prepared to participate as much as necessary or as much as invited to do. But everything leading to today is to agree to put this in place, and between now, or actually August when we file, and November, do all of the education possible, and it, with staff, with the residents, teaching the residents, maybe even, more participation by the consultant, but that's
But as far as
determined.
as far as a PR campaign, all we can do is the education aspect. Provide
So we have all the information, if somebody was going to gather that and put it together for all the effects that have happened in the past and how many residents were affected and those kind of numbers, not just how much it's going to cost, but what the effects were. Because certainly that amount of money would be way less than what I've spent in the
Yeah.
9 years that I've been in
The
Westmont.
village can provide any interested group like that all the information you need.
Yes.
And in fairness, if an opposition group comes in and says, we want information, the village will provide them information too. I imagine the village at village board meetings will be announcing, hey, this, assuming it gets approved by the board, this will be on the upcoming election as a referendum issue.
So in the past, maybe on your experience then in other villages, is this something that typically is passed? Or, with the short window between now and November, it just doesn't seem real likely that we'd be able to get that much information out at the rate that it's going to cost people per month.
Other communities have not sent this to referendum, they've just approved it.
Okay.
mini home rule, but.
Yes, some are home rule and had the authority to do it. Non-home rule communities, in speaking to their legal counsel, they just felt there was a community need. They felt there was some statutory authorization that allowed them to do it, and they did it.
And Westmont's not in that position.
It interprets the statutes perhaps a little more conservatively and feels like this is a true utility, and the statutes say if you want to operate a municipal utility, it can only be done after a referendum's held. And we think something as significant as this should go to the voters.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
But I think she raised another point that I think we have to continue to talk about with this, is what happens after? How is the money going to be spent, and, what are the effects of having the additional dollars to do some of the things we want to do? I think that's part of what she was asking also.
I think the recommendation was showing an annual maintenance cost and how much we would use for a $10 million debt retirement. And I think I would imagine once we did make the decision to move forward, all that information would be made public from the study, from the recommendation of our consultant.
Yeah, there are some startup costs, so administratively, there's a lot to be put together. You touched on, even the billing systems, those types of costs are up front. So what we're envisioning is a referendum in November for essentially a January 1 effective date, and start building that, and having a May 1 fiscal year is get as much in place as possible to maybe even, I don't want to say we're in a hurry, but we're very eager to solve a lot of these issues. So we want some constructive improvements in the 2015 construction season too, and that would all be developed in the early months of 2015.
That 1.6 million you referred to annually, that was the debt retirement plus some addition. I thought I saw 1.6. How much would this projection be, what you're proposing, what would we annually receive in
Fees.
in fees? I quit calling it tax, in fees. The 1.6 is what we would receive, okay.
Every year.
Less,
Every year, and part of that, the 840,000 would pay off the debt retirement on a,
740 of it was debt retirement.
Okay.
100 was paid to
okay, and the balance could be ongoing annual maintenance and a full-time staff and some of the other things we're talking about, okay.
I have a question regarding the rate method and townhome subdivisions, because, for example, it's all about me. If you live in one of those areas, and I do. For example, a townhome subdivision that maybe is a duplex, you don't own the land, but you own the building, would the billing mechanism go to the homeowners association, or would it go to the homeowner? And how would it be figured? Because you don't own the land.
It's a policy decision that still has to be made. So it depends on the flexibility of the billing system. What you don't want to end up doing is sending a single bill for stormwater to everybody that's in the utility billing system. So the easiest thing to do with stormwater is to bill the property owners. There's always going to be an owner, so you've always got somebody to go back on properties and billing systems where owners don't necessarily sign up for service. And you've got water shut off, and if somebody just takes off, you still got to track down the owner for the account that isn't getting paid, because stormwater is there 24/7, 365 days a year. It's not like
It would be
water.
a separate water customer for each building. It can just as easily be set up so they are separate stormwater customers too, or if they're rentals and there's multiple units owned by one owner, it can be looked at collectively too.
Okay.
Like
We have a
one
lot of-
meter, one water meter, but several.
Yeah, like a condominium building, they don't necessarily have individual meters. There's one meter for the building, and the association or the building owner pays the water bill, so
I have it on my
that
thumb
could be
drive.
treated the same way. There are some, we were talking about detention, to equate it to that and the incentive. Sometimes the detention basins in a subdivision are built in easements but on private properties. Other times they're a separate outlot and they're managed by an association. So treat the association as the owner of that parcel, and that one parcel is a detention basin, and then they, effectively communicate that cost to the membership.
We were looking at one example earlier today of a townhome community, Connemara, that has 28 townhomes in it. Each one of them is on its own parcel. If you look real closely at the data, there's 2 common area parcels because there's area, this village owns the streets, but there's long drives and parking areas that are outside of the individual townhome parcels that are owned by the common area. So if you looked at each one of the parcels, you'd have 7 of them that were Tier 1 and 21 of them that were Tier 2. Then you've got to either bill everybody for a piece of the other 18,000 square feet of impervious area, which would be $2.10 a month per owner, or you divide that property up between each of the 28 homes, and everybody ends up in Tier 2, but nobody, the 21 Tier 2 people aren't paying the extra $2 a month because of the homeowners association getting part of the bill. So there's a lot of policy decisions that has to be worked through.
To me, that can be very complicated, and I guess we'll have to do a lot of homework on that because we have a lot of those types of areas in the community.
Yeah, and I think tonight was the workshop, we're getting the information, and then the idea is that on Thursday night, we'd make mention of it at our public meeting, and then on the 24th would be the point we'd address it, if we're going to pass it or not.
I don't know, I'll just throw this out here, and I don't even know if it's possible or if it's something we'd want to do, but there's so much information to digest, and for a lot of our community, this is the first time they're hearing it. They're watching the meeting at home, or they're going to watch it on YouTube, and it is a lot of information, and everybody wants to know how it's going to affect them personally, and I get that, and I think that's important. Do we want to consider maybe having one more meeting where we can maybe have staff also put something together and kind of go over it in real simple terms, capsulize it? I don't know, because this is really a very, very important decision for us as a board, and even more so for our residents. So I think the more education we can get out there, the better.
I agree.
Just my own 2 cents.
I just want to ask a question on, when we look at the rate comparisons, ours versus other communities, we're talking about a 20-year debt service
On the bonds, right?
on the bonds.
Yeah.
Were the other communities in the 20 years also?
All of them aren't paying debt service, so they're doing only pay-as-you-go capital on that list of Illinois cities. On the list of Illinois cities, not all of them are using debt financing. Champagne's a good example. Champagne is debt financing, but they're paying the annual debt service from property taxes and only using their fee to pay for day-to-day operations. So they're generating about $3 million a year from their fee. Using it, they have a very aggressive inspection and maintenance program. They do a lot of planning. They've got $5 million program. They had a $5 million program before they did the fee, and we're spending about $3 million on debt service and wanted to free up more money to build more projects. But because of some of the concerns that maybe all the projects weren't necessarily stormwater, that there was a lot of aesthetics in some of the projects, they decided to keep the debt service over on the taxes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think Sue's point is also well taken, because I think staff can do the next step in what a lot of people may ask for, which is, for instance, like my own home, if I took out my driveway and put in the pavers, how much does that, there's a cost factor, I know, but there's also a credit savings. And it'd be nice to just let people know that the things that they do themselves will affect, to some extent, what they're paying also.
If I'm not mistaken, if we make the decision to move forward with the referendum, then that gives staff the opportunity to work out these details.
Yeah.
So prior to the referendum, we're going to make it public on what credits are available, what it's going to cost them. I think the number one step now is, if we want to proceed with the recommendation of creating this utility fee, getting on the ballot in November, we really have to pass it by the 24th meeting, or address it on the 24th of July. And then after that, I think it would be the education process for everybody, including ourselves, coming up with the criteria, the bill, and the credits.
But as John mentioned, we want to solve that as quickly as possible so that it's in its final form, so that that can be taught, as long as possible between now and the actual election day.
Come on up. I saw movement, so I figured,
You have wonderful peripheral vision. Dan Charleston at 118 West Chicago. Just obviously the capital cost associated with the utility is the most cumbersome and burdensome aspect of the projects. Curious if the ordinance is contemplating additional developer impact fees related to stormwater management. Curious as well if the two TIFs in the village, which have a development component that contemplates public improvements funded publicly, if that's been considered as part of the conversation as well. And getting to point, for me personally, so for instance, the capital components don't cover a spot where I live, right? And so at a certain level, I'd love to isolate those costs and figure out how to fund them somewhat differently, right? With either impact fees, one-time fees, or specific allocations to some of the affected areas. I totally get the ongoing costs, but the capital cost part, is a different animal. So just a couple questions, a couple thoughts.
The TIF.
Yeah, I think part of it is almost a misunderstanding as to, like, you're not in a capital cost area. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I'm not disagreeing. I don't know the answer. But my understanding is this being a community-wide problem and everyone contributing to the problem, even though a detention pond's not required by your house to alleviate flooding, you still could be contributing to the problem with your property. And
Well, not even could be, is you are. All parcels are at some point depositing stormwater generated on that parcel into the public system. So the stormwater utility and the maintenance of that is not a replacement for any of our existing ordinances and stormwater management obligations for any new development. So if there's not really an impact fee considered in this, but every developer, as they redevelop, have stormwater management ordinances that already apply and will continue to apply. The fee is for, in part, the maintenance of the system that we already have, and the new constructive improvements where if you're in, the oldest part of town is the best example, has the least amount of stormwater management in it, because when it was developed and built out as residential subdivision, these weren't considered. So these constructive improvements may include neighborhood detention facilities and relocating the stormwater flooding to a controlled area. So that would be a type of a constructive improvement.
Yeah, I'll address the impact fees. So developers have to comply with the stormwater management ordinance, providing detention on site, best management practices, all of that, which costs money. We impose impact fees already where there's a subdivision based on the impacts to schools, parks, et cetera. That's authorized by state statute. As a non-home rule community, we're not authorized to impose a separate and unique impact fee on developers simply because they're developing land. What we can do is have strict ordinances and require them to comply with the ordinances. If you start hitting them with too high of fees simply to develop property, you're going to find there's no positive development in your community. They're going to go elsewhere because it's cheaper to develop. So it's kind of that fine line. What the village board can do and what they have done is have lot coverage restrictions, meaning you can't cover more than 35%, 40% of your lot, and comply with a very strict stormwater management ordinance. And then future owners will pay a user fee to help future ongoing maintenance and improvements. As far as the TIF district, that's a great point. Yes, TIF funds could be used to help solve regional stormwater problems. Again, this is going to take time. These are very brand new TIF districts that really aren't generating much in the way of fees right now. But if at some point we have enough fees developed and a problem identified in a way where we can apply that money, absolutely.
Within the TIF itself, though,
Within the
right?
TIF
The
itself.
money
Yes,
would have to go back into that
Just to
TIF.
give you an idea, last year, I think it generated $15,000 of TIF money for the village.
So small.
Any additional comments from the audience board? Again, the idea is Thursday night, I'm going to, under my report, will highlight this workshop meeting. And then on the 24th, it'll actually be an agenda item for discussion and hopefully to make it, 24th of July, make a decision if we're going to go to referendum or not. And then at that point, if we make the decision, I think all the homework needs to be done in the education process, started with all the fees.
You know, Mr. Knoll, just again, I'm thinking about some of the things that have been talked about here as it applies right by me. And when I moved over on Traube Street, there was one house across the street. That one house is now 7 over these 30 years. And that's the same in all the neighborhoods. And so what used to be places where the rainwater went are, as you said, they're all being slowly covered over a little bit. And so this does affect every neighborhood, whether you get a detention pond or not. I think the folks, how many folks here were served on the committee? A couple of you. I think they've done an unbelievable job.
Served on both committees,
Both committees, yeah.
Yeah.
Both committees.
stakeholders group and the ad hoc committee.
I think they've done a phenomenal job because I think this is an important issue.
And Joe, is this going to be on, where's Larry? We'll put this up on our village website. so
Speeding
we
is
can-
being recorded, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this information, Joe, and for those here, will be made available so they can learn more about it. Any additional comments from anybody in the audience? Again, I want to thank everybody for attending and those who have served and our consultant on the committee and staff. At this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn to executive session to discuss personnel.
Some, Seneca?
Motion
Or
been made and seconded. Roll call, please.
Trustee Scott.
Yes.
Trustee Barker.
Yes.
Trustee Seneca.
Yes?
Trustee Addington.
Yes.
Again, I thank everybody for attending, and we will not have any further business after executive session. This meeting part is adjourned. Thank you.